It not necessarily. Kansas City not really known for their cocktails. Let's put it that way.
Maybe we should just swiftly move on. Maybe I'm dwelling on the wrong thing. Hello and welcome to episode 204 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. It's Saturday the 10th of February. Hope you've had a good week and you're well and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm not a rock star, but I'm a 3-time CMO and trusted marketing advisor. And with the help of my guests and chums, I want to share the marketing street knowledge that I hope will inspire your inner rock star. Come and say hello. You can find links to me and my guests in the show notes at rockstarcmo.com or on LinkedIn at Rockstar CMO. And we are proud members of the Marketing Podcast Network. This week in the Marketing Studio, Jeff Clark and I will be discussing the value of educational content marketing. And in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar, I'll join Robert Rose for a Super Bowl cocktail and a thought about making room to encourage creativity in your team. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back. We'll be right back.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the Boys Club of Advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
Right, it's time for my weekly free consulting session with our resident strategy advisor, former Forrester Research Director, Jeff Clark, in the Rockstar CMO Marketing Studio.
How are you doing today? Come on in to our studio.
Thank you, mate. I'm doing all right. Thank you very much. How are you? How's sunny Massachusetts?
Well, it is sunny. It's still winter, but it is sunny, and we've had a stretch. We had a stretch of 7 gloomy gray days, when the sun's not coming up early and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden we switched to a stretch of 7 sunny days. So,
wow, nice.
Yeah,
we've been having similar, some nice. I think last time we spoke, it was a grey day, if I remember last week. So we've had some of that, but today it was bloody raining all day. But on the positive, I did go into the big London and met with my chum Benedict Hum, who, if you remember, shared that report we talked about last week,
which is an awesome report.
From Metier. So if folks are interested, so that was 8 B2B marketing trends. So if anybody's interested in that, lovely of Benedict to share it. If you want to go back to last week's episode and listen to that, or I think it's been quite well received on LinkedIn as well. It's been quite a nice episode.
Did you talk about Aunt Benedict about how 8's too many? You got
and you need F in 5.
You need F in 5, or you could go with the sexy 6 or the whatever, or the lucky 7. But 8's too many.
I let them keep their brand, man. The effing thing is ours. But yes, they should keep it to 5. It'd make it easier to remember. Mind you, we only plucked out 5 ourselves, didn't we? So they could have just gone with that. But anyway, so let's get back to the topic of this week. I think last week we made a promise that we were going to talk about educational content marketing because you've been inspired by, and I've got to get this right, the Collective 54 Pro Serve podcast that you've been listening to. I've never heard of that before. It sounds rather good. And Greg Alexander interviewed somebody called Andrea Fryer, who we both, I know of her. I think you actually know her, don't you?
I do know her, yes.
Sherpas. Yeah. And it got us thinking, we were chatting about this conversation. It got us thinking about educational content marketing. I wrote a blog about it, a blog post about it, because I'd had that similar experience with a vendor. You can read all about that in the blog. And the fact you need to get this balance between being useful and helping people or boring them and treating them like, as I put it, fucking idiots. So what say you, Jeff? What did you learn from this podcast?
Well, it was, I thought it was interesting. I mean, the podcast, it's ProServe. it's for people in professional services. So one of the things that he had found out from Andrea was that, she's got basically what is a professional services business. And it's like, well, she went from, over 6 years, she went from, just starting up to $5 million in revenue without making a sales call. And it's like, whoa, how that, so that was like, how did that happen? Yeah. And so she has, her term for her process is content-driven inbound marketing. And it's, she says it's much more about the audience and about solving people's problems than is talking about yourself or your product or blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It's basically, it's improving the way you do business development, and solving the business or helping to solve the business problems up front as opposed to after the sale. Here's what we promise, and now we're going to deliver now that you've cut the check. It talks about a lot of the tactics, or she talks about a lot of the tactics that we talk about all the time, doing blogs, newsletters, training, speaking at events, and things come to her either through form fills on her website and she's got lots of assets and newsletters and things that people can subscribe to the website, or she actually does education. She runs classes, workshops, 2 days, 3 days. That's how I met her. I took one of her, I think, 3-day agile marketing workshops back in my earlier days at Serious Decisions. And, but that's kind of like, that brings in the business.
Nice. Yeah. You looked at this and you looked at the blog post that I'd written, and you're applying I've got to get this right because the way that we're terminologying this is you're going to apply our 5 effing fundamentals, the master plan, the knowledge, the story, the campaign, the machine, to this idea that Andrea shares. So shall we start with the first? What's the plan, Jeff?
Yeah. Yes. And I think since this is her marketing, it's like, well, then the 5 fundamentals of marketing should actually work in the context of what she's doing. And, we got to think, hopefully we'll have some examples that are kind of beyond just her particular use case. But, one of the questions in your master plan you've got to kind of ask yourself is education your product, which is, that is in Andrea's case, that is one of her products. Is it central to addressing the needs of her prospects? So, you get something that's relatively new, like Agile marketing was 5 or 6 years ago, or like, so many different types of technology, AI, so is education central to addressing the needs of the prospects? Because they're in a point where it's like, I need to wrap my head around this. Before I can actually solve my problem, again, I need to know more about how this could do it. Or is education simply a post-purchase requirement? So therefore, this would not necessarily be part of or central to your marketing. So as I said, in the case for Agile Sherpas, she offers training. So it is a product, but that's not where most of the money comes in. The money comes in consulting, which is the follow-on that says, okay, I want you to come in. I want you to help train a scrum master. I want you to help, the teamwork, how are the processes working? Can you, a lot of making Agile marketing work is getting everybody on the team to have a level of understanding. And we actually, one of the things I was thinking of other examples of where this comes into play is, we did this when I was at Serious Decisions and Forrester. We'd have workshops. Certainly we did webcasts. Everybody does webcasts, but, we would do workshops where we'd bring people in. We're going to do a day or 2 days on, campaign strategy and, planning implementation. And it's like, so you're bringing in prospects, you're bringing in some clients, maybe early stage clients, and it's like, and then you find out, this is actually going to lead to a consulting gig or more advisory subscriptions or whatever. But I think there are other examples out there. Certainly, I remember, like the days when, Java.net were relatively new, and the big platform companies that, where they were doing all kinds of training because they're trying to sell software development kits. They're trying to sell deployment license. They're trying to get it. So education becomes key to, helping the customer on their journey and then solidifying them as a client that's going to do follow-on business with you.
Yeah, I like the point that you're making there, and I sort of didn't add it to the notes of when we were prepping to this, because I think the challenge, I'd be interested in how maybe Andrea and other people have handled this, is when your product is knowledge, how much do you give away in the pre-sale and how much do you give away? I mean, that must be quite the challenge that we all have, right? Now, our, I think, position, without speaking for you, Jeff, is I think that we would probably, particularly based on the conversation we had 2 weeks ago about gated content, we'd probably err on being more generous. I don't think you need to worry about the fact that people maybe you'll put all your frameworks out there and everything, people will read them, but they'll still hire you to implement them or to help you with them. You're building trust, right? Just because you've given them enough tools that they could do it themselves doesn't mean they can do it themselves or will do it themselves. I mean, I can go to a hardware store and do plumbing, but am I going to do it, or am I going to hire somebody else to come in and do it? So I think that's an interesting point that you were making there. But also, I mean, when it comes to goals, when it comes to the master plan, when we talk about the master plan, Jeff, we're often talking about goals and leveling those up. Where do you think educational content sits within that? How do we contextualize this work stream within the goals of the business?
Well, I think that's where you have to, and this get a little bit into our next point, is like when you understand the journey that the customer is going on and where they're going for information. And then, one of the things that Andrea talks about on the webcast is kind of like the conversion of, people consume content for free, or they sign up for a little subscription. Okay, now I know them. Now can I pull them into a workshop? They're actually paying me some money. Yep. I'm not going to make a ton of money off it, but they're paying for me that time. And then, okay, how many people within a workshop can I then take and do consulting with? So you've got all of these various conversions along the journey, right. Which, I mean, as I was thinking about this, it's a tough thing. You're not going to find any, benchmarks from consulting organizations like Forrester or Gartner that says, here's how the education process works, because it's going to be so unique to your business. But you got to kind of like set up, start with some expectations, measure, and then set your goals based on what you think. What's it take if I want to be a $5 million consulting business? What's it take for me to get from the inbound I'm getting early to that point?
Yeah, and I mean, we're going to get to the campaign part of it in a moment once we've moved off of point number 1. So I completely agree with you. And the other thing as well is that educational content is often recommended to people as it's good for SEO. So it's good for the vanity metrics. It drives traffic and all that kind of good stuff as well. And I also think that this bit of the planning that you do at the beginning is going to be so dependent on the category you're in. So we've just discussed professional services and training, but I think for a lot of organizations, this is also going to be about product-led growth, isn't it? We want to educate them on how to use our most complex parts of our product, so that then the product becomes sticky and all that kind of stuff. Plus, I know that we're going to try and move off of point number 1, but plus, some marketers, and you feel for them, have to educate the buyer on the problem because they're the first into a category. They're early, or they're trying to change the concept of the category, which was very relational to what the example you used with Andrea and Agile Sherpas, which is what HubSpot needed to do, right, with that inbound marketing. They were creating a category, so they needed to do years of education of people to get that inbound marketing term, which Andrea has also used. So that's interesting. So anyway, so on the topic of knowing stuff, what's your second fundamental one? I already know it because I know what I'm
if we're going too long, you can speed the tape up on the next. So I think the next one is, it's all, we call it the knowledge. So it's researching, understanding the needs. And I think one of the things that's really important here is you need to have intimate knowledge of what the customer needs and the journey they're going through, because this is where you kind of match the education you can provide to what is going to be their entry into working with you. And there was another example that I forgot to mention on the previous point, which I can bring up here, So I work with a client that is a managed service provider, and they do a lot of work around cybersecurity and, cloud and networking, all kinds of things. But when it came to cybersecurity, there are a lot of customers in their base that, or prospects that, they don't know where to start. It's like, so we would do training on the NIST, National Institute of Statistics and Technology, or Science and Technology. Yeah. They have a framework on how to deal with cybersecurity, and it goes through a whole kind of process view of understanding, where you can detect and understand what's going on from a cyber risk perspective, and take whatever's recommended actions are. And there's process and there's technology involved in that. And obviously, the client I had was, they're the ones that provide that, both the technical expertise to do consulting, and they sell all the the different platforms and tools that can help a customer. And so in that case, they were providing free education to a group of IT people that were in private schools, and it's like, these are people that they have enough staff to be dangerous, but they don't have quite enough to be really expert on this. So by being the expert and giving them the free information, you're setting yourself up to be the person who can provide the paid gigs.
Absolutely. I mean, that was also, the point I was making, is that sometimes you need to educate your buyer on the problem, right? And make them realize the danger they're in, or the pain that exists, or the benefit they could get, or any of that. That's part of what marketing is, isn't it? Is educating them. So I guess that you're showing them how hard this is, and how about some help? So So I like that. So we're
order forms are in the back of the room.
So we're on our usual advice about understanding your buyer persona and their needs, and in this specific sort of case, it's understanding their educational needs. So what do they need to know, isn't it, around this stuff? But also, I was thinking about, as we were prepping for this, is also adjacent topics they might be interested in to engage with, which might help with the buying process, or might help understand the problem, or frame it, or set it up. I once worked with a really good government sales guy at the beginning of my software career. Because I'd worked in government, I ended up in pre-sales, getting lumped together with the government sales guy, right? And but what I liked was part of his skills was helping the buyer with procurement, as he'd been through so many government procurement processes. The buyer often never had, right? It was their first time. They needed a content management solution. They'd never bought anything before, and this guy could come along and say, "Well, here's how your process works," and that was really valuable to them. So I think there are adjacent topics maybe you need to look at with the buyer about helping them, buy maybe, or maybe help them express the problem internally, or something like that. I think is interesting. So we've done the plan, the master plan. We've done the knowledge. And so we move on, and I should know our model, and we move on to the story. So tell us about the story, Jeff.
You don't have to read the notes. You know the model.
I know the model.
So I'm going to quote from the blog that you mentioned earlier, that you posted earlier this week, which you say, aside from getting our education in front of the buyer early, we need content that is additive to the conversation the buyer is already having. When they do make contact, we need to be ready with the good stuff. And so this is, in our last podcast, we were talking about, some of the stats from the trend report that Metier had, and it's like, not only are people contacting us, late from a sales perspective, they're not even trying to connect with us at all until they have it pretty well figured out. They're going to have their list of vendors, they're going to have their questions to finalize their decision. And so this is where education really helps you be up, helping way early in their decision making process. And when they're doing their research. So you kind of have to map out, and this is one of the things I think Andrea does a very good job of going through in the podcast, is so when you understand what the potential customer's journey is, then it's like you got to start mapping your content out. What kind of things do they need early? What kind of things do they need as they're going down to the next stage? So as they're doing their thought process, help provide that content. So you take them and lead them all the way, to where you can, either, bring them into a class and potentially make some money there, but also bring them into selling your products and services. And, and so, and this is where one of the other things that she mentions, which we often talk about, is you kind of build, a core piece of content. She called it a pillar piece of content. And then you figure out how you can, put that into bite-sized pieces, reuse the content. You got an ebook or something, so that gets repurposed in blogs. You do your podcast. You make it part of your training sessions. So you're not, you're trying to make sure you do it effectively and efficiently and earning trust all along the way because they're hearing a consistent educational message from you.
Yeah, I'm consulting with a client at the moment, and one of the things and they're looking at this isn't just specific to educational content, but they're also looking at their messaging, and they're trying to redevelop their messaging. And I'm saying, what feedback are you getting from the field? What feedback are you getting from your customers? What are the frequently asked questions? And that's exactly, when it comes to education, frequently asked questions from your customers is key, and that's the golden stuff, right? And I completely agree with the journey thing you mentioned there, and that was the challenge I was writing about in my blog post. That's what inspired my blog post, because it was clear to me they only had basic content about the basics of their category. So the nurture sequence that they were sending me, they weren't getting any deeper with the topic. They were kind of getting thinner and sort of offering me different stuff. But they basically, all they seemed to have in my plain language was the Ladybird book for idiots. And I don't know whether the Ladybird book translates to the US, but basically
in the US, when you say Ladybird, we think of Lyndon Johnson's wife. So.
Oh, okay. Well, if you think of it's a series of books from when I was little, and they were all in the same style with the same cover style, and they were called Ladybird books, and they would educate you about various things. Now there's grown-up versions that are kind of satirical on various things, like my wife bought me the Ladybird book for hipsters when I joined a London agency. It tells you all about hipsters in a funny way. But anyway, we've gone down a tangent there. But maybe the better idea there, maybe the better analogy is an idiot's guide. So they were basically sending me an idiot's guide, and the nurture sequence didn't go any deeper. And absolutely, as we discussed, there's a place for that, right? It's in awareness, top of funnel, and SEO. But we need more than that. And I think that's what you're saying here with the story, isn't it? Is map all of that stuff against the journey about what content we need to move people through the journey, to educate them, and what is it that when they're really close to us, we want to be educating them on. I like that. Yeah. Okay, so we're doing all right. I mean, we've done 3. so we move on to the 4th, which, as everybody knows, our model is the campaign. So how do we put this campaign together, Jeff?
Well, it's how does education fit into your integrated campaign strategy? And again, we've touched on this a little bit when you talk about the journey and the fact that there's going to be different types of content that they're consuming. Well, there's different types of interactions as well, and so you've got to kind of build out that integrated campaign strategy and figure out where this is where the term education kind of cuts 2 different ways. One is you're trying to, through the whole journey, educate the customer, but at some point you might actually do true education where it's like somebody's going to sit down and, over a period of days, hours, whatever it is, start to learn more deeply about how they're going to solve this problem. And so that's where does that fit into my integrated campaign strategy? And that kind of maps back to the original question of why. I mean, is this your business education? Is this a leader, a lost leader, or a leader into another form of business that's where you're really making your money? Or is this something that happens after the fact, that after the sale? But I think you've got to address that question, figure where it fits into the campaign strategy, and then I think you got to also figure out how you're going to be consistent in your communication. So, again, if you're building off of out of a core piece of content, your messaging's got to be consistent from those early stage interactions all the way to the end. And also you've got to be, this is one of the things Andrea offered a warning on, is you got to be consistent in terms of the timing of your communications. if once you capture the contact information from an individual, whether it's email, phone, whatever, text, then, how are you connecting with them? And is it biweekly, monthly, quarterly? She says, don't try to overschedule yourself. So you got to maintain the consistency, because if you try to build a schedule that you personally can't execute on, then that is a way of actually losing trust with the customer.
Yeah, and I think that that's why sort of the first 3 steps are so important, isn't it? Because then the campaign should just write itself. And I think to your point now, and perhaps to Andrea's point, is that and this is just basic content marketing, isn't it? Is that if you're then going to make a promise of a newsletter every week, you better make sure you've got a content plan that supports that, or an education plan that supports that, and it matches to your customer journey and all that kind of stuff. If you can't do that, then commit that it's a month or whatever it is, right? You make sure those things are in sync. So I think that's completely right. And like I say, I think it should just write itself. Once you have the goals, the plan, you have that mapped out onto the journey, I think it does, doesn't it? It naturally appears, right? And I think one of the things that we mentioned just a moment ago as well that I wanted to point out here with the campaign is to encourage people to be generous. At this point, right? So less gated, and because the CTA is slightly different, which the call to action isn't to sell something, the call to action is to educate somebody. So we need to be really careful with that subtlety of that, right? Is that the idea of this campaign is to get somebody educated to buy, to be better at buying, or to realize they have a problem. It isn't necessarily to buy, I think, and unless you're in Andrea's case, it's a very simple, because she sells services and training, so it probably is. But if you're a software business, it's a slightly different
exactly
action, isn't it? Yeah. So, and one of the things that we're completely well over time, but one of the questions that came out from this, I was thinking about when we were talking about education, and to my point I was just making is, and I'd like your opinion on this, Jeff. What is there a risk here that you create this kind of program, and you put you decide on the investment, you do all this, you get to this point, and an executive says to you, well, if we educate the buyer, they'll go and buy from somebody else. And what's your view on that? If an executive came and said that to somebody?
Well, I would say one is we need smart buyers out there. And depending where you are in terms of your maturity of the market, if this is a market that's developing in its early stages, then you need to do a lot of education. If you get into more of a, market that's well established, then that may not, certainly if your products are, not generic, but basically it's like, you could buy the same stapler from every, 5 different vendors, and, then it's
you've got a different problem.
You got a very different problem. But I think in general, what you're trying to do is you're trying to set yourself up as the trusted vendor. So by educating the customer, you not only make them a better buyer, but you set yourself up as the trusted vendor, much as the cybersecurity training I was talking about earlier.
Or HubSpot example. I mean, that is actually my example, because years ago when I started in marketing, shifting my career to marketing, I started reading a lot of HubSpot content way before I was able to influence a HubSpot deal, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it's like, and so you naturally go to HubSpot versus MailChimp or somebody else. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. All right, so that's we're on to our 5th. So we're on the home straight. So the 5th fundamental for us is the machine. So tell us how we apply the machine to this.
Well, this is the marketing ops category, or the operations category. So, measurement, technology, process, data, all of the sort of the main components of your operations that really, the mechanics to support, training education are actually fairly simple, and it's, I would say there's a low cost of entry, because you don't need a ton of technology. You certainly need an ERM and a CRM system. You may have that already. You're going to have a website. You want to know your web analytics. You want to have integration there, so you could be able to do your conversion metrics. If you're doing, if you're running training classes and events and stuff like that, then you want to have an event management software that integrates with your integrates with your CRM. Andrea talks a lot about using ChatGPT to brainstorm content, ideas, outlines, but not write content, because you don't want it to be too generic. And I think, from a process perspective, it is about that conversion funnel. I know we don't often like to use the term funnel, but that is the common vernacular. We're trying to get people from, what's the handoff from very early engagement or maybe unknown to people registering, people like downloading things, sign up for newsletters, all the way to where we're closing, professional services deal. And from a data perspective, you've got to put it, since you need to know how everything is working, the integration of your tools and having a consistent repository, whether that's in the CRM system or another data management system, is absolutely necessary. You do not want to make this, particularly for small businesses, a manual job. You want it to be automated as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because actually, the smaller the business, the more automation you can bring in, the better. But it's often the smaller businesses that don't really figure that stuff out, right? And think, oh, no, it's fine, we'll use a spreadsheet or whatever, and it's dreadful. And also, in the notes, and I know you didn't just mention them, but I thought it was interesting because we didn't collaborate on this beforehand, but you mentioned Spark Toro, and they've got a new version coming out, and I've been playing with Spark Toro, and that's for audience research and understanding what people are talking about. And I think that's a really interesting idea as well, to understand, what are the questions that are being asked on the internet today about your category or topic. And I know Spark Toro isn't the only solution out there for that. There's what's that tool? Anyway, there's all. I'll try and remember and add some links into the show notes. All right. So, and also, yes, there was my point on this one, was that this is a great opportunity to engage with professional services, right? Education and support teams, because they also may have an e-learning platform. So it might be that you can put some budget or effort and help or create some content to offer some free courses that will not only help you sell your product. I know that in our examples, a lot of the product we've been talking about has been sales and services, but if it is a software product, but it also could benefit the buyers and the customers by you creating some of these sort of how-to things. So I think that's also part of the machine, isn't it? Our e-learning platform, if you will.
Absolutely.
All right. So that's not bad. I mean, half an hour. Thank you very much, listener, if you're still listening. So that's great. So to summarize, we'll create a master plan. We'll get the knowledge. We'll create the story. We'll plan the campaign, and we'll run the machine, as is our 5 effing marketing fundamentals. So it only remains to discuss what the song is going to be.
Well, hopefully people have stuck around to listen to what the song is, because we're going to, you got to go to school. That's what education's all about. So why not play out with the School of Rock from 2003 from the cast Jack Black and the rest of the cast of the movie School of Rock. If you want to be teacher's pet, better get to school on time.
I love it, yeah. And I quote from that movie on the website, and saying that you've got to feel it from your blood and guts. So you feel it. Yeah, so I've probably got that quote completely wrong. So great, we'll play out with the School of Rock. And are you going to be in the studio?
I'll be here.
Good. And you'll be on time, and you'll be the teacher's pet.
Yes.
Or I'll be the teacher's pet. All right. I'll see you next week, mate.
See ya.
Cheers, buddy.
Bye.
Baby, we was making straight A's, but we were stuck in the dumb days. Don't take much to memorize your life. I feel like I've been hypnotized. And then that magic man, he come to town. Woo-wee, he done spun my head around. He said recess is in session, 2 and 2 make 5. And now, baby, oh, I'm alive. Oh, yeah, I'm alive. And if you wanna be a teacher's man.
Thank you, Jeff. That was a tiny slice of School of Rock by Jack Black and the cast of the movie. And that podcast that inspired Jeff there was the ProServe podcast from Collected 24. And I will, of course, include a link to it in the show notes. Right, it's that time of the week to wind down in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar and join Chief Troublemaker at the Content Advisory, Robert Rose, for a cocktail and a marketing thought. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend, and welcome to the weekend, and welcome to the bar. Not that this is a big weekend for you there in the UK, but although I think the NFL is getting a little more popular there, I think with all the with the games that they're playing there, et cetera, maybe a tiny bit more. But anyway, here in the US, there can be nothing other than discussion about the Super Bowl this weekend. But so we have to talk a little bit about it, and we have a cocktail to celebrate it. But yes, this is the big the big weekend for the big game, the superb owl, as we like to call it, because of the copyright notions of the NFL.
Oh, wow.
Well, they used to be very draconian about it. I mean, they would come down hard. It's been less of that these days,
Right.
about people saying the actual name of the big game and all of that. But you used to get your hand slapped pretty regularly if you did that. But like I said, not that much anymore. But yes, it is the big game, and to celebrate, we have a cocktail. Now, for those of you who are regular listeners of this show and the bar, you'll know that I can't stand San Francisco. I really do have a special place in the dark part of my heart for that team. And so I will be rooting very quietly because I don't love Kansas City either. But I will be rooting for the Kansas City Chiefs to win yet another Super Bowl. They seem to be the dynasty over the last few years. And this is called a Kansas City Horse Feather, the drink that we're having tonight.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting, it's a great drink, even though it's an awful football team. Tell us how you really feel, Robert. Anyway, it's a wonderful combination.
You're in a terrible bind, aren't you, with these two
Yeah,
teams?
exactly. Yeah. It's like, let's play some poker. It's a combination of rye, a good rye whiskey, and then this is going to sound weird, I know, but it works. Trust me. So it's rye whiskey, a little ginger beer, or ginger ale if you're here in the U.S., bitters, and lemon. And it's a really simple little drink to make. So basically, you take whatever your preferred sort of portion of whiskey is, 1.5 ounces, however you like to, however you roll. And then basically a good amount, let's call it 4 parts of ginger beer or ginger ale. And then a little Angostura bitters, and then a lemon wedge squeezed in there. Fill that all up into a, well, you can do it a couple of ways. You can put it into a mixer all and shake it up and make it a little bit of a pour thing. But because it's fizzy with your ginger beer, you can also just pour all of that into a big highball glass and fill it full of ice and and stir it up and away you go. And it is a great game day, depending on your sport of choice, game day drink, but it's also wonderful just to sit and have as an early evening, late afternoon cocktail.
And what a name. I mean, I don't always ask you about this, but why is it called the Kansas City Horse Feather? Is that your name for it, or is this an actual...
That is a name I found online. I was actually looking for, I was actually looking for Super Bowl themed drinks, cocktails.
Yes.
And most of them looked like crap. And this was the first one that I found that didn't look ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, it's a very similar drink to a Moscow Mule, really. But so that's, I think, where the sort of name comes from with Kansas City and sort of what would the Kansas City version of a Moscow Mule be called? Well, a horse feather might be it. So there you go.
Yeah. And is Kansas more of a rye whiskey place than a bourbon place then?
It not necessarily. Kansas City not really known for their cocktails. Let's put it that way.
Maybe we should just swiftly move on. Maybe I'm dwelling on the wrong thing here.
That's right. They do barbecue the wrong way. They do most everything the wrong way. But
yeah, it's not an area I know. I mean,
all the Kansas City fans you're going to get letters for this. For sure.
Well, I think 70% of our audience are in the US, so it's people will know what you're talking about, which is good. And and obviously, I mean, we've lived in the US, and the Super Bowl. We know how big the Super Bowl is. I think it's fantastic. And also, you'll be pleased to know that my trademark application for Rockstar CMO has come through from the British thingamajiggy. So soon I can be litigious about people saying Rockstar CMO.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Well, congratulations
That's my
on
retirement plan.
There you go.
All right, so we're drinking these Kansas City horse feathers. Are we watching the Super Bowl, or are we just chatting? And
Oh, of course, we have to. We have to go to the what has now become. I mean, you can call it Football Con or NFL Con. It's basically Comic Con, which is in Vegas this whole week. Yeah, so I think we have to go to Vegas, do all the things.
Yes.
I actually do want to go to Vegas and see the Sphere, the new Sphere, which
amazing,
looks cool, and go see U2 in concert.
Yeah.
But yes, I think we have to go to Vegas. We have to watch the game, have many more than one of these, and not care about the outcome and just sit and chitter chat about all things.
All the things, right? So we're in Vegas, and they did a great job with the Formula One. So I'm sure that it's going to be an amazing weekend there. Yeah, and that ball thingy, right? So during the halftime or all the stoppages that you have, and we're not marveling at the ads, which is what you're supposed to do, and conversation turns to marketing, as it often does with us. What are we talking about this week?
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the creative process. Which I think is a really interesting time for us to think about the creative process because, and especially as it pertains to marketing, because this is, of course, a weekend filled with big ideas, right? That get tried out, literally trotted out in front of the millions of people who will watch the game, and brands spend millions of dollars for a few seconds of airtime with their biggest, most creative, most out of the box ideas, trying to make a mark. And it's interesting because what I've noticed is that there is these days, and this is maybe especially true in B2B marketing, but I see it in B2C marketing as well, where the content teams themselves, the creative and marketing and content teams, they're usually structured in a very linear creative idea supply chain, right? In other words, most people on that team are never sourced for a creative out-of-the-box idea. The idea itself is usually generated further upstream.
Right.
It's either generated by an agency that we have on record. It might be generated by our CMO. It might be generated by a VP. It might be generated from some creative, super genius that we have locked up in the basement. Whoever it is, someone comes up with the idea that we're going to do.
Yeah.
And maybe it's good, maybe it's not. But typically what happens is that it starts to trickle through this sort of linear supply chain. And basically it starts to get watered down, right? Mm-hmm. And by the time that it gets to, and by the way, it may not necessarily watered down by the practitioners. It may be the practitioners who come up with the idea and then the leaders water it down. But basically, because it goes through this linear type of supply chain of creativity, the creative process, by the time it gets to actual expression, it's usually sort of a average, data-driven, incremental sort of, yes, this is the safe thing we should be saying.
Yeah.
And even, by the way, and this was a fascinating question I actually got from a client a couple of weeks ago. They were frustrated because they actually said to their team, they actually went out to the team and went, hey, we want your cool, out-of-the-box, get energized idea, right? We want you to be pumped up and get some cool innovation or creativity. But because we're so locked into this sort of factory supply chain of creative process idea, those people not only can't really come up, they don't feel like it's their place.
Right.
Because they also know that if they throw something up the supply chain, it's very likely to get turned down or watered down by the time it gets back to them. So how do you do that? Like, how do you solve that? Like, where there literally is no room for the creativity because we're so busy doing the expression of ideas that come in from, sort of the incrementally better idea. And one of the things that I have found to be helpful here is that what we tend to do, and this is true across big or small teams, and it typically often happens with smaller teams because smaller teams will tend to outsource anything new or innovative or cool or weird or out of the box, or basically they can't see, they're unable to get out of their own way of the things that, making the donuts every day, fixing the widgets, doing the SEO, doing the search engine marketing, doing the email marketing. And so they go, oh, we want to do something cool. We should bring in an external source to do that, right? To help us see the way, break us up, right? And now, that's not always a bad choice, right? Bringing in somebody extra to help break the patterns of what you do can be really good. It can be very helpful to sort of literally throw a monkey wrench into your mechanics so that you are forced to break something. However, one of the things that I've seen be really helpful, and again, this is really, really directed at smaller teams, is instead of that knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, let's bring in somebody new to do the new thing. What it is like, no, we have to make room for new. We have to make room for the creative, the weird, the innovative. And so outsourcing the mechanics is the thing to do. In other words, if you're a small team and you're working on marketing and blah, 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 and you want to do something new, you need to make room for it. You have to make room for doing those new things. And so instead of making room by bringing somebody external in, make room by literally forcing those people on your team to outsource the mechanics of the things that they do every day. Right. And the reason that that's good is because we can know how to do it. In other words, we can teach an agency or a freelancer or someone how to do it. But then we can say, and we know if it's being done well because we've been doing it for so long. We've been mechanics on our own car for so long that we know exactly what needs to get turned and twisted and all of that to make that work. That forces us to create a void. And that forced creative void helps us pull in things that are weird and out of the box and big ideas and innovative. Now, there's a catch to all of that. And the catch is that in order to do that, you have to understand what your widget making process is. In other words, you can't just go, I don't know, we kind of make content that just sort of happens and it's ad hoc and I don't know. You've got to map it. You've got to understand that process so that you know what parts are the widget making processes so that you can outsource the right things, make room for the new things. And that's basically the key is understanding where you are in that process. Then identify the widgets or the mechanics that you can outsource to force you to create a void that you can fill with something new or innovative or interesting or a change in the way that you do things. And that might be a way for even smaller teams with limited budgets to get that sort of big, weird idea that we see so often on Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many questions in my mind forming around this idea. The first one is, you're talking about the sort of two ends of the spectrum in terms of getting external help in. One is the big ideas agency, and the other one is the doers that can get shit done in a practical sense to allow you to have the big ideas. But also, I really like that process you were talking about there about understanding what your process is, so you know which bits, where your weaknesses are and where you can, and also not just where your weaknesses are, but knowing you understand your process so you can outsource it, so you know how to measure it and you know what's needed to be done. Imagine getting that done by an external agency would be highly valuable, isn't it? To get some external to come in and say, well, this is your process. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. That can be helpful, right? That can absolutely be helpful, is to have an outside view to help you see the forest for the trees, kind of thing. And to walk through that process. That can be very, very helpful indeed. Yeah. And the key is that it's a big, scary thing to do, right? Because, you look at your team, and if you were to, have your team sort of list out all of their tasks, right, on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, the things that they that fill their day full of stuff, and that basically don't make room because their jar is, their proverbial jar is filled with these tasks. They don't have room for thinking about anything weird. Right. And so if you then start to go, if you suggest, and this is, by the way, uncomfortable for both the teams and leadership, to say, Joanne or Bob or Mary or whoever, their jar is filled with these rote tasks that they do. They simply have no room to think creatively or out of the box or change up the way that we're doing things. And I can't ask them for that because they're too busy doing the other things. And so, but the tension is, if I want to outsource that, the immediate reaction is, well, we have somebody doing that, right? And they're doing a great job at it. Why would we outsource something that someone is doing very well? And by the way, this is the same tension from the practitioner themselves, right? The practitioner go, that's my job. I do that really well. I know how to do that. That's my thing. Yeah. And what the answer can be, at least it's an opportunity to think about, is that you say to that practitioner, yes, I know you do that job amazingly well, and I want to pull it away from you so that you have time to do new, interesting things.
Yeah.
And that's the hard thing it's not easy, but it can really pay dividends, because those people are typically, they're close to the business, they have creative capabilities, they have innovative capabilities, but they're so filled doing the rote tasks that they just they can't make room for anything new.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's such an individual thing. I mean, like, I remember a billion years ago when I was pre-sales selling CMS, and I stood up in front of the room and saying, you don't need to code HTML anymore. And somebody at the back of the room, this lady went, I quite like doing that.
That's right.
You're slightly sensitive to that. But also what I like here is the... It is this idea of removing the daily drudgery and also discovering who your stars are. And I would imagine that is going to really help you with the retention of your team, the engagement of your team, and the whole dynamic of how that works. In that, so often, or a few times in my career, we've worked with a creative agency, and you look at the work they're doing and the way they're sitting thinking, and they're doing their mood boards and all that kind of stuff. You're looking at them going, I want to do that. I don't want to be doing all this shit stuff I have to do every day. I want to be the one sitting in the mood boards and doing all the... So I imagine there's probably a lot of latent creativity within our marketing teams that look at the people that are allowed to sit around and think about stuff and think, I want to do that. I love it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you've got to understand, the key is not just because the other side of that coin, right? There's two sides of that coin that need to be taken care of. And the other, and we talked about one just now, which is the tension that exists with, I'm good at that. I know how to do that.
Yeah.
And if you take it away from me, I'll be doing something that I don't know how to do and that is innovative and weird and new, and I might fail at it. Yeah. And they're scared for their job and probably have every right to be. And so you have to, so that gets to the other side of the coin, which is you've got to get headroom from your leadership, from your budget, from your, because they might not come up with amazing creative thing. They might not be able to do the new and innovative thing. They might not be able to, there is a risk involved with forcibly removing the rote and making room for the new. That is a hard thing to do. Even if they have that latent talent, right? Even if they have that latent skill and have been bugging you for, months to say, I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to do this but I see the agency doing it. We could totally do that in-house. And it's hard. So as a leader, as a manager of those people, you've got to go build in the permission, clear the runway, as it were, for them to try that. Right.
Oh, absolutely. And that appetite for change is such an individual thing, the thing you mentioned just then, because that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about having an appetite and an aspiration for change, and that you're not scared that, like you say, but I've done this for years and this is a change to my job. And that's something you need to work as a manager through, don't you? I think. Yeah.
It's looking at it like, you have a team of people and you're trying to evolve them, right?
Yes.
And in order to evolve them to become, as a team, not just individually, but as a team, you have to evolve the team to do more valuable things for the business, right?
Yes.
And innovation and change and thinking outside the box and creativity and, independent, by the way, of your practice, right? You might be a a designer, you might be a writer, you might be an analyst, you might be a measurement person, but that creativity and that talent needs to evolve, and it won't evolve if all you do is the same mechanical thing along that creative supply chain every day, all day, every day. You're not evolving the team. No. You're keeping the team in a very staid place. Yeah. And so when you replace people, then what you're doing is you're just replacing a widget in a machine. You're not actually making the team better over time. Absolutely. And sometimes the only way you can make a team better over time is to remove the widget making and forcibly insert something new so that they have to evolve. They have to grow.
Yeah. And the widget making are the teachable things, right? The insight into your business. And, all of that good culture stuff, you can't teach, right? You can't outsource that. You can't outsource your thoughts and feelings. You can outsource, creating HTML.
You can, and many people do, right? Yeah. But the question is whether you're getting the best result out of that, right?
All right. Yes. So if people are looking to, I know there's a website that's going through an evolution at the moment. If people are looking to get inspired to make this sort of change, where might they find some content about that, Robert?
They can do that at our wonderful new website at contentadvisory.net, where we have our thinking and our blogging and our emails and our webinars and all sorts of wonderful things.
Yeah, all the things. And you did a webinar the other day that was great. I think it was week before last. I'm sure there's a link to it on your website. And we've been promoting it a little bit, and I suggest anybody goes and has a look at that, and you and Kathy talking on that. And when we spin the dial on the interwebs and we want to find you, Robert, where are we going to do that?
You'll find me primarily on LinkedIn these days. Mm-hmm. So I've been enjoying LinkedIn and on Threads. I've started to really notice a big uptick on Threads. So I've been hanging out there a lot. There's some really good quality conversation going on Threads.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to capture that 2009 Twitter thing that I think we're all chasing, and it's
well, and it's also hard to remember, right? It's one, it's a new, talk about making room for the new, right?
Yeah.
How do you got to make room for the new to go in and remember, because it's not available through your your automation software. Exactly, so you've got to actually go in and participate in Threads.
Yeah. All right, mate. Well, I'll see you over on Threads and LinkedIn. I hope my listeners do as well. But also, more importantly for me, selfishly, you're going to be in the bar next week.
Of course.
I'll see you then, mate. Cheers. Thank you, Robert. Really interesting topic there. We could have talked about that for ages, about what external help you bring into your marketing team. Maybe we should let our team be creative and get other folks in to do the day-to-day work. So that's a wrap on episode 204 of the Rockstar CMO Epic Marketing Podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott. Thanks to Jeff and Robert for sharing their insights. You can find links to them, their work, and the things we discussed in the show notes on rockstarcmo.com, along with our blog, newsletter, and all of our previous episodes. Thank you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track, and jiving along with us. I'd love to hear from you, so please say hello or drop a rating or review in your favourite podcast app, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, Jeff and I will be chatting about my current journey with writing a book, or I've just seen some great data on B2B marketing that I might pop into our conversation, so we might discuss that instead. And as you heard, Robert will be back in the virtual bar with a fresh marketing thought. Until then, have a great week. I hope you again and join us here next week on Rockstar CMO FM.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.